Hey, everybody, welcome to the Elseworlds Exchange. I'm Sal, and I'm joined today by Glenn Greenberg, who is a name that you may have seen on a variety of books that you have in your collections, and has incredible insights. And the way in which the two of us got together here for this show is actually kind of funny, because we don't know each other. We've never met in the flesh. And yet one day, I hope you don't mind me sharing this story, I was trolling my LinkedIn, as often most people do. And I had a message from Mr. Greenberg that said, "Hi, Sal, watch your show. If you mentioned crossovers. Well, I happened to work on one extensively that you may be intimately familiar with, and that was The Incredible Hulk versus Superman." And I was like, yes, I'm very familiar with that book, as I am with all my crossovers. And you were like, well, if you ever want to get in on a show and talk and get in depth about that whole process, I'm your guy. And I was like, well, let's wait 3 or 4 or 6 months and we'll do that. Because that's really how long it took for us to finally do something. Maybe even a year, I don't recall. But here we are. So welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you very much. And the timing couldn't be more perfect, because when we first started talking about this, we didn't know that Miracle of Miracles, DC and Marvel, were actually going to get together and reprint all of the crossovers in an omnibus edition. So it was like, wow, let's make this happen. Let's make this conversation,
even more prescient, right? Exactly. Yeah, because otherwise it was just going to be a fun, indulgence for the both of us, where I'm like, yeah, let's talk about another one and why, and just at the end, obviously lament the fact that we'll never see them again in print outside of the, hundreds of thousands of copies that were printed back in the day, because it was the 90s. Yeah. But, which is actually kind of fun. I'm glad actually that, like, such a, I don't know, I hesitate to say unprecedented, because Marvel DC crossovers, they started out in the 70s. I think it was 76 with Superman.
76, Spider-Man? Yeah, that was the first one.
Right, and there had never been a decade until after JLA Avengers where we didn't get one.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of a shame. But just so happens that the bulk of them took place in the decade when the most books were ever printed ever. So if you ever missed out, you could just go get one.
Chances are you won't have to spend a lot of money for most of them. Yeah.
You shouldn't anyway. Like, you could just, I've rounded out, because I've been on record saying I was never as a kid a big fan of Amalgam, but I've rounded out my collection thanks to extensive dollar bins. I now have 3 copies of Assassins.
I was the assistant editor on Amalgam, so
no kidding. Now here's the thing:
tread carefully.
Yes, no. Well, listen, I mean to say that as a kid, I didn't even know it was coming. Like, I was not plugged in. I didn't know all the behind the scenes stuff. Sometimes my comic book retailer would want to tell me about what's going on. I'm like, I couldn't care less. I just want to know, what Pete's up to this week, or how things are going in my regularly scheduled monthly or weekly comic books. So when Marvel versus DC or DC versus Marvel came out, I just read it, and sure enough, issue 3, I'm like, what is happening? Now, okay, you were the assistant editor on Amalgam. Now, what does that mean? Like, at what level are you brought into the process, and what specifically do you do during that experience?
I wasn't really all that involved with the planning or the creative stuff. A lot of that stuff was kind of just handed to my office, which I was the assistant editor for Tom Brevoort at the time. So we were basically just told, you're doing these. And I would be like, looking at the titles and go, oh, that's a cute concept. Combining Iron Man and Green Lantern, for example. Oh, yes. And Paul Smith is drawing that? Cool. Batman and Wolverine is Legends of the Dark Claw,
right.
I think Larry Hama wrote that, which made
Larry Hama wrote it. Yep.
And the one that I felt the most connected to was Spider-Boy.
Oh, wow.
Which was written by Carl Kiesel, who was terrific, and it was drawn by Mike Wieringo.
I know. What a
whose
legend.
Stuff. Yeah, I mean, and I hadn't really been familiar with his stuff at that point, because I wasn't really reading The Flash.
Right.
With all due respect to the people who were working on the book at the time, it wasn't a personal thing. It was just The Flash was never a character that I really gravitated to. Totally. So, Ringo's pages started coming in, and I was blown away. They were gorgeous, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Carl Kiesel did the inking on that book. He wrote it.
I think
and
you're right.
inked it. And I thought that they were a terrific pair. The art team of Ringo on pencils and Kiesel on inks. And I had of course seen some of Ringo's stuff on Flash, but it didn't wow me the way, and it all comes down to the inker sometimes, you know?
Sometimes that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Another perfect example was Gene Colan. You give Gene Colan the right inker and the stuff just sings. You give him the wrong inker and it's very wonky. It just, the wonkiness just, so anyway, so with Ringo, I was just very taken by his stuff. And Carl wrote a great script. And I happened to, because I was working a lot with the Spider-Man office as a writer. I mean, I was on staff as an editor, but I was doing a lot of stuff as a writer for the Spider-Man office. And I walked into the Spider-Man editor's office, Ralph Macchio, and I knew he was looking for an artist at the time, because I believe around this time is when Dan Jurgens bowed out on Sensational Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I said to him, Ralph, if you're looking for a Spider-Man artist, I said, consider Mike Wieringo, because he's doing stuff for us right now. Ralph, he would be perfect. But you got to get him. You got to give him a great inker. You got to get him a great inker. Yeah. And Ralph took my advice. He's always given me credit for saying, Glenn, I would never have considered him if it hadn't been your suggestion. Yeah. So that's the Amalgam book that I felt the most connected to.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and we can thank Spider-Boy for Wieringo jumping on Sensational. I think around issue 8 or something, he fills in, and
I think 7 or 8,
and like, and you can't. He obviously Ringo doing stuff on Friendly Neighborhood like over a decade later. Yeah, you're kind of like, yeah, he was ubiquitous. Like, you knew he was born to be a Spider-Man artist.
Yeah.
And yeah, Spider-Boy. I have an interesting relationship with Spider-Boy because of how. I didn't want that matchup in the first place, and then to merge them was like insult to the wound. Plus, it was Ben Reilly, and I was one of those kids back then who was like, "You replaced my favorite Spider-Man." So I try to divorce myself from who I was back then, but at the same time, I'm like, oh my god, like, well, just reminding me of all this stuff.
Ben Reilly and the Clone Saga is a whole other conversation. I was knee deep in all of that too. Because I was heavily involved with the Spider-Man group at that time as an editor and as a writer. So that was that I will tell you that when we did the Marvel DC crossover itself, which led to Amalgam, we didn't know whether we should use Ben Reilly or Peter Parker.
There was actually a conversation back then, because I remember.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that was the Batman Spider-Man crossover. The first one, I mean, both of them are by DeMatteis, but the one with Bagley, where they were just like, you could tell there was this, it's got to be Peter, we can't do this. And then just a little editor's note that just says, this is before the events of Spectacular Spider. Like, this is just, don't think about the Clone Saga right now.
Right. Yeah, well, a similar conversation happened during DC versus Marvel versus DC, whichever it was. What do we do? Which Spider-Man? We wanted it to be current. Sure. So we went with Ben Reilly, but there's this sequence in the book where he's explaining who he is, and it was so convoluted, and I remember wincing, saying, "Oof, we should have just made it Peter."
Oh, I know, right? Yeah, when he goes to the Daily Planet and he's like, yeah, they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, so your name is Ben?" He's like, "Yeah, but my stage name is Peter Parker. Like my professional identity is Peter Parker." And it's like, "What are you doing, Ben?" Yeah,
it was an act of desperation, really.
Totally.
You know, but I mean, ideally,
well, you have the other problem of, like, let's say it is Peter Parker. Does Peter remember fighting Superman in 1976, or is this, because I know also you guys, oh my god, we're opening up a huge can of worms here. We are because it's like, okay, so you're doing DC versus Marvel. The conceit is universe versus universe, but in other crossovers, including Spider-Man, Titans, X-Men, those all take place on their own Earth.
Okay, you just opened the door to get into, because we had done Marvel versus DC. We established that they lived in two separate universes. We had done Amalgam. We'd all done. When it came time to do Incredible Hulk versus Superman, we had the same conversation. And at this point, I was high enough. I was the editor at this point.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the decision came to me and my writer, and we said, F the universes. we're going back to the first 3 or 4 crossovers where they all live on the same universe, on the same planet. They just never met each other yet.
Exactly, which I think is almost cleaner at this point, where it's just like, no, all the events up to the point you're reading took place, like, presumably, Maximum Carnage happened and the Justice League just couldn't be bothered. That kind of concept, because of course Batman knows about it, but in this universe, the Hulk Superman one is particularly interesting because it's not just, oh, we'll see Superman and Hulk fight. We just did that in DC versus Marvel, but also it's a homage piece. It is a flashback story. Yeah, there's all these different levels now. When we pre-gamed the show, you mentioned there's a lot of baggage, a lot of history with this, the evolution of this crossover, and I'd love to get into it because I think it's a good indication for the audience about like how these things come to be and how they end up what they are, as opposed to like the fan service armchair Twitter post where it's like, well, obviously it should just be this and this, how does this even come across your desk at the beginning? Because at this point it's 99, the crossover or the fight, the Amalgam stuff, that was 97, 96. So it's been a few years.
We'd been doing a lot of the crossovers. We're doing them again, actually. Yeah. We stopped doing the crossovers. I think X-Men Titans was the last one for a long time. Yeah. And then we started them up again with Batman Punisher.
Right.
And the funny story, the whole ball started rolling with Punisher meets Archie. That's what opened the door. Yes. Don Daly, who was the Punisher editor at Marvel at the time I was there, for most of the time I was there, he wanted to do a Marvel DC crossover featuring the Punisher, but the two companies hadn't really talked to each other about that for many years for whatever reason. I don't remember anymore. But Don saw a way to get the ball rolling again by connecting with Archie Comics and doing this insane book, Archie Meets the Punisher, or Punisher Meets Archie. Again, I can't remember who got top billing. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that our editor-in-chief at the time, Tom DeFalco, used to work at Archie and was still on very excellent terms with the editor-in-chief, Victor Gorelick. So that kind of smoothed the process going. And sure enough, we do this book. Nobody knew what to make of it. It was wild. Yeah. For people who don't remember this book or don't know about this book, we had the actual Archie artists doing all the Archie characters, and John Buscema did all the Punisher stuff.
It's true. Yeah, it is a wild book, and there's I remember the die cut cover, and there's. You guys pulled out all the stops, and for seemingly from my perspective, for no good reason whatsoever. I'm just like, whoa. And I remember, Wizard at the time being like, what is this? Why is this happening? And I love the idea that it was, well, we kind of want to start doing things with the other guys, but maybe we can get the ball rolling with Archie. I mean, so I assume it's just,
open the door.
Does it open the door in terms of like DC going like, book sold a lot of units and it was just Archie. Maybe if we put Batman in there, it'd sell even better.
I didn't work on those particular crossovers, so I don't know all the details about whether it was, DC looked at it and came to us, or we looked at it and went to them. I could tell you the broad strokes, which is Punisher versus Archie or meets Archie. Yes. Got the
conversation
started. The door. Yeah. And so next thing you know, we did 2 Punisher Batman books. One produced by us. The first one was produced by DC. Yeah. And DC insisted that it star the Azrael version of Batman because that's who was in the Batman suit at the time. Sure. And then when we did ours, which would be the follow-up, we could have Bruce Wayne back because Bruce Wayne was going to be Batman again by that point.
Oh, okay.
and this was a point that DC really insisted on, and we were like, so we get Bruce Wayne. You insist on Azrael Batman. We only get Bruce Wayne. Yeah, okay, sure. We'll take
I wonder which
Bruce
one.
Wayne.
yeah. We'll take. Oh no, I guess we'll have to. Well, yeah, we'll handle it somehow. Now, the phenomenon of the you get one, we get one. That was only for certain books. Yeah, because it only happened for certain books.
Yeah,
and it seemed that. Like DC published one, Marvel's published one, but it was only with random books. And now that I'm thinking about it, it was ones that starred Batman. Right. But what was the logic behind that? Was that a kind of like, what was the logic behind that? Just money, just being like, now, is it, if you do one and we do one, we keep the profits entirely for the one we do, and you keep the profits entirely for that one? Or was
no, I think. Well, again, I wasn't involved in the business side of stuff.
Fair enough.
But I think that it was a profit sharing. I think that no matter what, we
would assume
split it down the middle. The only difference was that we would publish one, and they would publish one. We would use our creators, our artists and writers. They would use theirs.
Gotcha.
So we did Chuck Dixon and John Romita Jr. on ours, and I believe DC, Barry Kitson did the artwork on the DC Punisher Batman. I can't remember who wrote it.
Oh yeah, I want to say it wasn't Dixon, was it?
No,
Lake of Fire was oh crap, Denny O'Neil.
Oh, it was Denny. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, that makes perfect sense because Azrael was his character.
Exactly.
That was his Batman. Okay.
Oh, and it fits seamlessly in with that run to the point where in the Night Quest or Nightfall saga, they reference it. Like
I know.
Azrael says something like, I failed against Punisher, and I'm like, that's canon. That's in the omnibus.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, with the Marvel ones, it's like, Frank didn't put that in the journal this week.
Yeah. So they did theirs. We did ours. Same happened with Batman Spider-Man. We had DeMatteis and Bagley, and the DC one again was DeMatteis. I mean that was rare that one guy got to write both.
Right.
And then they used, I think it was Graham Nolan.
Yeah. It was I think it was Nolan. I'll have to look that one up.
He did the second one. So that's how it worked. I mean, Batman was going to sell. At that point, Batman was guaranteed, and so we were absolutely willing to pair our characters with Batman.
Totally.
We knew that was going to be a guarantee.
Yeah.
Superman, them doing a Superman Silver Surfer and then us doing it just, I guess we didn't think that two Superman Silver Surfers were going to sell that that much.
I would make the same call. I feel like, and I know I've talked to creators who are working today who lament not being able to work on any crossovers now, but also the way that they articulated the kind of like metrics of the gaming of the system was kind of like a well, who's helping who? Like what's my interest? Like obviously. Yeah. You want me to, like, if you're Marvel, obviously you want us to let you have Batman because that's going to bolster whoever he's teaming up with.
Right.
So, but who are you going to let us use and pair them up? It's why it's almost miraculous you got two Spider-Man Batmans because they're both the flagship characters. Whereas Spider-Man, Superman, that makes more sense because Superman, actually, I don't remember. I think back then, Spider-Man was helping Soups out a little bit.
At that point, I would. You're talking about the original,
the first one, the 76 one, yeah.
I think you might be right about that.
I mean, honestly, at the very least, it was certainly taking the flagship character. Like in 76, they weren't. Batmania had not quite hit its heights yet, so they were like, but they did. Of course, the next one was, of course, Batman Hulk, which I presume was only the case because they're both named Bruce. But
also because Batman is Batman, and at that time the Hulk TV show was still on the air.
That was pretty big. Yeah, that's true.
And I mean, it was the oddest pairing.
Yeah.
But when I first saw the announcement, my head was like blown because it's like, Batman's my favorite DC character of all time. The Hulk is my favorite Marvel character of all time, and it was like they reached into my brain and picked it out. And I was like,
oh, I know.
Oh my God, my two favorite characters from the two companies together. I couldn't believe it when I first heard the announcement.
Oh, and with Jose Luis Garcia Lopez on.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It looks and is better than it has any right to be.
Of course, yeah.
So
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so with Hulk and Superman, was there any conversation where they were like, "Well, are you sure it's Hulk Superman? Couldn't it be, you know?"
There was no question about that. What happened was, so we were doing all of these Marvel DC crossovers.
Right.
And I was, it popped into my head. It's like I wasn't happy with the outcome of the DC versus Marvel story between them. I just would have liked a little bit more meat to that.
Totally.
And when they first met in Superman Spider-Man book 2,
right.
Again, it wasn't really a satisfying encounter between these two powerhouses.
Yeah.
So I said, well, look, we're doing all these crossovers now. Why don't we do Superman versus the Hulk? Yeah. And at that point, I believe I was already an associate editor, which meant I was editing my own titles at that point. Oh, nice. So I was thinking about it, and I don't know how this came together. I don't remember how this came together, but my pitch to DC, because you have to approach DC with the concept. Right. My pitch to DC was Superman versus the Hulk, written by Stan Lee.
Oh, wow!
Now, of course, I'd spoken to Stan about this.
Oh, you already did.
I broached the subject with him, and he was into it, and it was the quickest approval that I'd ever
really?
seen.
DC was like, "Oh, Stan's doing it. Yeah, we're in."
Oh, they like were salivating. I mean, they I could not believe they were. First of all, they were amazed, and then they were like,
interested. Yeah,
they couldn't believe it. Now, also at around the same time, I had been trying for about 1.5 2 years to get Steve Rude to do a project for me. Yeah, and he turned. We built up. We'd established a good association. We talked a lot, but I could never get him to work for me because at the time he hated Marvel. he thought that Marvel was like the great Satan that destroyed Jack Kirby and treated Ditko like. I couldn't argue. I was like, Steve, I wasn't there. This was like 30 years ago. I wasn't
exactly.
There yeah. So, but he the funny thing was that Steve was doing other stuff for Marvel. He was doing like a lot of consumer product stuff that paid very, very well, but it wasn't comic books. Right. So he could wrap his head around doing stuff like that, but not working on the comics. So, but his foot was in the door. So I kept on like kind of nudging him every now and then to do something for me. And then I said, Steve, how about Superman versus the Hulk written by Stan Lee? Well, that was it. He was on. So Stan and I were talking about it, and those are. I will tell you that those are some of the memories from Marvel that I cherish the most, because I'm on the phone in a story conference with Stan Lee.
That's really awesome. Yeah,
and hours. I mean, we had talked about it. We one of my favorite memories was so I had suggested to stay. Let's keep it simple. And let's not worry about tying into current continuity or any specific current version of Superman, because at the time I think he might have still had the long hair at that point.
Probably, yeah. At this point, yeah.
And the Hulk was completely in flux. I don't remember what his status quo was. So I said, Stan, why don't we go back to? We said it in the past. So it's your Hulk with Kirby, and it's the classic Superman. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows his secret identity. He's just the reporter for the Daily Planet, and Lois, has no inkling, because at that point they were married. Lois and Clark were married at that point. So I was like, no, we'll go back to the early days. And so we're talking, and I said, and the cool thing is they've both got secret identities during this period. Nobody knows that the Hulk is Bruce Banner. Right. And Stan said to me, he says, he said, that was really how the concept worked best, when nobody knew that the Hulk was Banner. Why the hell did they change that? Well, everything went to hell. And I'm sitting on the phone thinking, how, do I tell him that he's the one who did it? Right. that was him. I think with Kirby, a couple of years down the line. So I was like, yeah, Stan, I don't know why they did that. That's, they should have stuck with how you had it. Yeah. So it was stuff like that. So that was, so we were building, we knew the time frame when the story was going to take place. And I knew that Steve Rude was going to do an amazing, just fantastic Kirby-esque Hulk, because that was the idea. And the other thing was we were going to do classic Superman, but tie it in with specifically because I think DC wanted it this way. If we're going to tie it into Superman in the past, it was going to be the John Byrne Man of Steel miniseries Superman, where he's early in his career.
Okay. Yeah.
So Luthor would still be the businessman, and Lois would still be like this really sort of, you know, fiery, you know, very sort of woman of the modern age kind of thing. And, you know, and Luthor, it would be before Luthor lost all of his hair. So he was balding, but not, you know, but he would still be the evil businessman rather than the mad scientist, Luthor. Exactly. Which worked for me fine. So it was going to be Man of Steel Superman and Lee Kirby Hulk. And Steve Rude was signed on. DC loved the fact that we were going to get Steve Rude to do this, and it was coming together.
Nice.
But as we were getting closer and closer to actually starting, Stan was, I could feel him sort of like pulling back a little bit. And I think, I can't speak for Stan. Wasn't a mind reader, and I don't want to, like, you know, assume anything. But the closer we got, the more I kind of felt him pulling away. And at one point we talked about, well, bringing somebody in to maybe like work out the story outline, and then Stan would just script it. Okay. And my feeling was I didn't want to bring a writer in on a prestigious project like this, which I felt it was prestigious. Yeah. And then have them do all of the sort of like the thinking and the choreography and figuring out all the mechanics of the story. And then they have to hand it over to somebody else to do the scripting, even if it's Stan, because the scripting is, you know, the scripting is the fun part. Yeah. So I said, Stan, I don't think I don't know if that's going to work for me. I really don't think that's going to work for me. And ultimately we decided to just part ways in the most friendly way possible. There were no hard feelings. Sure. But I could hear the relief in Stan's voice when he heard that, you know, when he realized he didn't have to do this. And so as far as I was concerned, the project was dead, because DC, without Stan, like, that's how they got it, right? That's how I got DC on board. That's how I got Steve Rude on board. Yeah. And so I just figured I would just kind of let the project kind of fade away and die. Yeah. And what happened was Steve Rude just kept calling me. Knowing that Stan was off the book, he says, when are we going to get started on this? Let's find another writer. You know, okay, so Stan's gone. Let's, you know. And I was like, all right, Steve, you're still on board for this. I'm going to give it some thought. Yeah. And then I realized, who's the one writer that neither DC nor Marvel would have any problem with writing the Hulk and Superman? Yeah. And it was Roger Stern. And Roger was actually, when Stan first broached the subject of having somebody else plot it and then he would script it, Roger was my first choice. Oh, nice. But I just, you know, and Roger and I might have even talked about it. Roger would not have wanted to just plot it. He would have wanted to do the whole writing job. So when Stan bowed out, I was able to go, I contacted my contact at DC, my counterpart at DC, who was the Superman editor at the time, great guy named Joey Cavallari. And I said to Joey, I said, Stan's out. What do you think of Roger? And he was like, that sounds great to me. Let me just, you know, make sure. And Joey got right back to me, and Roger was approved almost as quickly as Stan was. All right. So, so basically I sat down with Roger, and I had a similar conversation, a plotting conversation as I had with Stan, which was, this is what I'm thinking. Set in the past, Man of Steel Superman, Lee Kirby, Hulk, early days of both characters. I said, you know, maybe Luthor has his hair still, or he's balding. And I said, in terms of villains, you know, I said, I said the problem with the Hulk is that he had so few supervillains in his early days. Yeah. All the villains that we know, like the Leader, the Abomination, you know, I said, who would we have? I mean, is Luthor going to team up with Tyrannus or something like that? And ultimately what Roger and I decided was, just have Luthor. We don't have to have a Marvel villain. There's no rule saying we have to have a Marvel villain.
Interesting. So there was no like pushback from DC or some insistence from Marvel that was like, oh no, we got to have our representation. Like we got to have some kind of counterpart. It has to be two. Because it seems like that was kind of like the rule, you know. It was like, or the fun, you know, the conceit of it. Yeah. I mean, even from the beginning, where it's like, oh, you got to have Lex and Doc Ock, and they team up, and well, that made Parasite sense. And Doctor Doom. Now, the Parasite's the only reason they did that is because Jim Shooter invented the Parasite. Right. Like, I want to put him in there, but yeah, I love the simplicity, and it also goes to, you know, the whole conceit of the idea, which is keep it simple, same Earth, early origins, uncomplicated, you know, because. There are other crossovers that do seek to make it as relevant as possible, right? Like the Superman Terminator crossover, where it's like, oh yeah, no, Matrix Supergirl and John Henry Irons and Superboy's in there, and it's like, whoa, you know, you're complicating the narrative here, folks.
Even Superman, which I thought was one of the best crossovers ever done, was Superman Aliens. Yeah, they had to do that conceit where he had the long hair and the mullet. One, which automatically dates it. Which
you could tell what year it is immediately.
Yeah, yeah. But no, Marvel. I mean, Marvel. I was the Marvel. You know, I was the Marvel guy. So
interesting. I wonder if if that was, since you were already from the perspective, like you were at a loss, kind of, where it's like, well, we're not insisting on having a Marvel rep in the story. Right. So there's no opposition.
Right. And also, I mean, you can make the case that, you know, considering the time period in which the story was set, the Hulk is kind of the villain.
True. I mean, oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he's the anti-hero, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, could we have said it a little bit later so that maybe we would have the leader team up with Luthor? We could have, but then we wouldn't have gotten the Hulk necessarily that we wanted, and we wanted the Lee Kirby Hulk. Yeah. We didn't want the world to know who he was.
Right.
And like I said, as the representative of Marvel, as the guy who's approving the story on behalf of Marvel, I didn't have a problem with just having Luthor as the villain. I think it elevated Luthor, and it was good for the story.
I agree.
There are people who I've spoken to recently about this book, and I mentioned, you know, there's no Marvel villain in the story, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I never realized that." So you know, it worked.
It's a really fun story, and I think it's only made better by its, you know, by approaching it from that vantage point of being like, keep it simple, keep it trim. You know, Luthor's a big enough bad for both of them.
Exactly.
And of course, like the other villain is like the looming threat of the Hulk, where, like, you know, Hulk, his reputation is kind of like a villain.
Exactly. Nobody knew anything about him. They just thought he was a rampaging monster.
Exactly.
The only concession that we made in terms of continuity in the present day was that brief framing sequence where it's set
in the present.
It's set in the present, where I believe Clark and Lois had only recently gotten married, and Betty Ross had only recently died.
Yeah.
So you've got this dichotomy of, here's Clark. Here's Clark in his happiest, you know, in his honeymoon period of being newlywed, and here's Bruce Banner, who just lost his wife. Exactly. And it's like, wow, you know, this poor guy. It reminds me of the time when we first met, and then you go into the flashback. And I thought, and that was all Roger. Roger came up with that, and I nobody foisted it upon us to give some
cement it.
Yeah. Nobody told us to give some lip service to the present, and that was all Roger. He took the concept from there, and all I had to do was sit back and just watch the work come in. And one of the best. And
how much fun was getting those pencils, right? Like when they come, when those pages come in.
Gorgeous. And we had apparently we had a spy in the office, because do you remember? I'm sure you remember Wizard magazine.
I'm intimately familiar. Yeah.
Okay. The day that the first pages came in from Steve Rude, the pencils.
Yeah.
We had never announced this project. I insisted to the execs at Marvel. I said, do not mention this project. Do not schedule this project. Do not advertise this project. I said, we need to make sure we get all, do not schedule this project. That's the other thing, because I wanted to make sure that all the pages came in from Rude before, because, you know, I mean, he takes his time, and he did not want to be, have a gun to his head with the deadlines and everything. I said, totally. I said, you want this to work out? Listen to me. Do not schedule. So anyway, so it was supposed to be only between, you know, the only people who knew about this project were me, the creative team working on the book, the editor-in-chief, and my old boss, Tom Brevoort, just because he was like my confidant, you know. He was like, you know, we kept each other in the loop of what we were doing, even though we weren't working directly together anymore. Absolutely. So the pages come in, and a couple of hours later, I get a call from the editor of Wizard, who's wondering if I can send him copies of the penciled pages. You're like, pages of what? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah, I was kind of like, you know, I know nothing, I see nothing, you know, I don't know what you're talking about, and you know, and you know, to this day, I wonder who the leak was. Yeah, but I said no, I'm not prepared to talk about any project involving the Hulk and Superman. And if I did have pages, I wouldn't be sharing them at this moment in time. Totally. And it still haunts me. who is the leak? Who is the mole? You know? Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. That's funny. I love that was an issue back then. The benefit of back then is no one could tweet it or make a very hastily put together blog post about it. It was just Wizards like, well, that's it. We got stymied. There's nothing else we can go. Yeah. we could post a blurb in that front section that nobody reads that has like little news articles about it. But like a blind item, you know. Right. They could probably Photoshop something. They love to put little matchups together. Right. Yeah. So but yeah, the pages were always a cause for celebration. You know, sure. The editor-in-chief, who was like, you know, one of the most cynical, you know, guys, like he'd seen it all, know it all. He was very hard to impress, you know. Yeah. And he'd always want to come in and see the new Superman Hulk pages, because that's nice. He even said he goes, that's the Hulk. Because that's the Hulk we should be publishing right now in the regular books. Yeah. So I even said to him, I said, gee, if only you had the power to make that happen. You know? Right. Yeah, you're only the head honcho. What are you talking about? That's funny. So yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, you know, okay, so this is 99. Well, it was 98. It was 97, 98 when we first started talking about it. When it started, well, sure, when it was the Stan project, and then when it was the Stan project, and then it became the Roger thing, and then you have to build in the amount of time that it was taking Steve to pencil the pages. Right. So yeah, it was. I would say it probably started around 97, and we got to work around, you know, 98, because I was gone by the end of 99. I had left Marvel by the end of 98. So it was published in 99, but 90% of the work, I would say, was done by the time I left. Oh, that must have been really bittersweet for you to be like, oh yeah, I'm not even going to get to see it finish. Like, yeah, no, it buy it off the shelf, because I assume Marvel wouldn't send you a copy. I think once I left, Tom Brevoort was kind of like he was the godfather of the project after I left. So I think he made sure that I got at least one copy. Good. And he also made sure that my name remained in the credits. Oh, that's nice. Apparently there was talk about, well, Glenn's not here since to send out the book to the printer, so technically speaking, he doesn't have to be the credited editor. and Tom made sure that my name's, you know, he added his name to the book, which was absolutely fine and fair. Sure. But my name was in there as a co-editor, and I appreciate that very much. Oh, that's nice. That's really nice. Because yeah, it deserves to be there. You spearheaded the whole concept it came from you. So why the hell not? Well, that's the comics biz. Pew pew pew. But there's another crossover that you worked on that I think you have to answer for, which is the Spider-Man Gen 13 crossover. Now, oh god, which inadvertently was also a Marvel DC crossover, but not for another couple of years. Yeah, what the hell is that all about? That's one of those projects that was basically assigned to us. It's one of those things where again, I was Tom Brevoort's assistant on that one. And I think it was just one day he turned to me and goes, oh, by the way, we're doing a Spider-Man Gen 13 crossover. And I either said why, or I said, who's Gen 13? Because they just weren't on my radar. You know, I wasn't really.
Yeah.
I wasn't paying much attention to the Image stuff at the time, other than I was kind of keeping an eye on what Spawn was up to, Savage Dragon,
same.
That kind of stuff. But Gen 13, I didn't know. I don't remember. I think that we just decided, because Peter David was one of the hottest writers by that, certainly at that point. And so it kind of made sense. And as long as, Image DC was, or Image, I guess it was still Image at the time.
Image Wildstorm, yeah.
Yeah. So as long as they were okay with Peter writing it, we approached Peter. On that one, I basically functioned as traffic manager. That one was like, I would call Peter and say, Peter, we're 2 days, behind schedule. Please just get us some plot in, or get some script in, or whatever. So I was basically the traffic manager, because it was one of those things where, there were certain projects when I was an assistant. There were certain projects that Tom felt much more attached to than I did, and on those, I basically functioned as scheduling man, traffic manager. Of course, I would read every plot, read every script, but it didn't stay with me. It was you were a support role. You helped support whatever project he believed in, and Whereas there were other projects where, Tom was he knew how passionate I was about those, and he tended to step back and let me micromanage, as the case may be. One example would be Spider-Man Hobgoblin Lives.
Yes. Now, I was surprised to see your name on that one, because, it's funny actually to compare it. Like, Roger Stern also worked on that as well.
Yeah. Well, that's where my relationship with Roger really solidified.
Was working on Hobgoblin. Now, that one was a long time coming, because, of course, there was this whole the Hobgoblin drama of like, from when he was invented to when he died to who was the actual Hobgoblin, and for the longest time it was like, yeah, we all know, or like if you were in the know and you read interviews or Comic Shop Bulletin or whatever, you knew who Stern wanted, but it didn't end up that way. And then
you didn't.
Well, he kept it a secret because he was like, because he left, right? He was like, he's like, well, I'm not going to tell you if you're going to.
He only told one person on his way out. He told Tom DeFalco, who had been his editor on Spider-Man and was taking over as the writer of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So Tom said, well, look, you're leaving. I'm going to have to deal with the mystery of the Hobgoblin. Who was he? And so Roger told Tom, and Tom didn't like the idea, and told Roger, and Roger said, well, you're the writer now. Make it whoever the hell you want. I don't care.
Exactly. I'm out the door. I don't even, I'm not invested in this anymore. So
Tom was going to do it a certain way. And Tom was going to reveal somebody as the Hobgoblin.
Right.
And Tom and his editor at the time just did not mesh well at all. And so the editor was, really chomping at the bit, Tom, who are you going to make to be the Hobgoblin? Who are you going to make to be a Hobgoblin? And Tom didn't trust that this editor was going to be able to keep his mouth shut. Sure. So he told him Ned Leeds. Oh. And the editor believed him. And then when the editor ended up firing Tom, two things. One, the editor established in a book that he wrote, the infamous Spider-Man versus Wolverine one-shot.
Yes.
He killed off Ned Leeds in that book. The editor was also the writer. And my understanding is he did it in a big
maliciously.
Yeah. I mean, it's in print. I did an interview with Peter David, who was involved in all the Hobgoblin stuff. And Peter said on no uncertain terms that the guy did that to spite Tom.
Interesting.
And so ultimately, it fell to Peter to resolve this whole thing. And he said the only person it could have been was Ned Leeds, but you killed him off. Yeah. So we're going to just establish that it was Ned, but now there's a new guy in the suit. Exactly. None of this was the plan, according to Tom, for Tom DeFalco. So anyway, you go through all this rigmarole, and through it all, Roger Stern he's over at DC writing Superman and watching all of this stuff, and he goes, the guy that I wanted to be the Hobgoblin in the first place, he's still out there, and I could still come back and do that story and fix all of this, up, and maybe give you guys a revitalized Hobgoblin.
That's true.
Because he was never caught.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And
because,
so
of course, by that point, Hobgoblin had morphed into a variety of ideas that never really lived up to what it had been previously, and that's and of course, it's also a nice little writing insurance because it allows him to return and in a big way and say, hey, there's this long-standing Spider-Man mystery that nobody really knows the true identity of the Hobgoblin. Well, here's Hobgoblin Lives. This this is self-contained story that kind of, and of course, because he had been holding that concept to himself the entire time, it all fell into place and it logically made sense. It wasn't just like one of those heavy retcons where you have to explain it and go through loops because the original author didn't intend for it to happen. This is the case where he's like, no, that was exactly all the breadcrumbs are there.
Right.
And I just
exactly. That's why if you read Hobgoblin Lives, we've got all those text pages in the back, which shows you how this all worked and how everything was connected and how everything tied into continuity without like violating it, you know?
Right, exactly.
Roger had approached every editor of Spider-Man since he left with the idea of going back and resolving the Hobgoblin mystery. And every single one of them turned him down until I came to him and said, Roger, let's do this.
Yeah.
And that was because, you know, again, I had pitched the idea. Tom Brevoort was my boss. He was my editor. I was the assistant editor. The editor-in-chief signed off on it. We all thought it could work. And that's where my relationship with Roger really solidified. I had approached him previous times to come back to do Spider-Man stuff, but the project wasn't right for him. For whatever reason, he just had an intrinsic problem with the concept or whatever. And this time I knew he was not going to say no.
Right.
And so that's how that relationship really kicked in. And now he's a dear friend.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great. And we have some dope books out of it. You know, we have some really like, and everyone always talks about it. They're like, hey, you gotta read Hobgoblin Lives. You gotta read, you know, as far as the crossovers are concerned, people are kind of like, you know, yeah, crossovers, you know, they're derivative or you can't really get any. But that Superman Hulk was pretty good. You know, like everybody's always like, well, that was pretty
I enjoy. I mean, the other idea that we've been kicking around. I mean, I guess it's okay to talk about it now. It's a long time ago,
right?
But one of the ideas that certainly I remember Brevoort and I were talking about was doing another Superman Spider-Man crossover written by Roger and drawn by John Byrne because they're best friends.
Oh, sure.
And to this day, I don't know why it didn't happen. I don't know if we even got to the point where we approached Roger and John about it.
Yeah.
But it was certainly something that Brevoort and I were talking about. And I just don't know if it ever went any further than that. But that was one of the things that had been talked about, at least in the office.
Interesting. I would have read the hell out of that. But also, I mean, you know, it's funny. You think about John Byrne working on both characters, and I think part of the reason why that might not have worked out was because of the Chapter 1 fiasco, where after, you know, Byrne's association with Spider-Man regarding that particular attempted retcon and then how it was received, and I'm sure sales, and they were like,
yeah, but I mean, Byrne would have only been, I mean, like conceptually, Byrne would have only been drawing it, and
that's true.
So, I mean, his art is still, you know, a draw, and it would have been Roger writing it.
I mean, that's fair.
I'm sure Byrne would have been involved in the plotting,
no doubt.
You know, Roger. It would have been in great hands with Roger.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, well, we did got kind of that in that All Access book. There's a little bit of a crossover there where the two of them team up to fight Venom and stuff, and that was,
which I believe I was the assistant editor on.
I think you were as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
that was the first one. All Access. Now, Access is a quandary of a character. I know that Ron Mars is particularly fond of that character, I believe, because he created him, and he's the only one who's ever used the character in either of the big two's titles. I think Axis shows up in a Green Lantern book or something, and then he just leaves and Marvel's. And I've heard rumor, and I won't name names because I don't know any of them, that says that there is like a don't use Access rule at Marvel. Ever since that day, they were like, ever since DC versus Marvel, they were like, don't use Access. Like, we don't want to bring up we don't want to do that. We don't want to deal with it.
Okay. I can talk a little bit to that.
Okay.
There wasn't a rule. It's just nobody wanted to deal with it.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, it just, you know, I'll give you an example. But I will tell you that Axis did come up when Roger and I first started talking about Hulk versus Superman.
Well, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. You guys have already established him as like the gateway for all these crossovers to take place. So, it's just that you also have to deal with another character now.
Right. And I remember distinctly saying to Roger, I say, okay, we've established that the heroes live in 2 different universes and that there's this character named Axis and he can bring the characters together. And as I was talking about it, I said, Roger, I'm already talking myself out of this idea. And,
yeah, exactly. Like,
and Roger's like, he was like, yeah, let's not touch this. He goes, if we have to spend precious space in 2 separate universes to bring the characters together into the story, he says it's going to be pages upon pages of all this setup before we even get to the main story that everybody wants to see. I said, Roger, exactly. You don't have to say another word. I said, we're not going to deal with this. And I will say that if you read, and I spoke to Dan Jurgens about this. If you read the tabloid Superman Fantastic Four. Yeah. Have you ever read that one?
Yeah. It's great.
You could see, if you read between the lines, because they do establish that I think Superman comes over to the Fantastic Four's universe. Yeah. If you squint really hard and you read between the lines, you can tell that was not the plan. That the plan was it was going to be Superman and Fantastic Four living in the same universe.
Right.
It's just they never met until now.
Yeah. That makes that's much more fun.
And to give, I guess, basically lip service to the whole separate universes thing, they basically covered it in the word balloons, the dialogue, and maybe some of the narrative captions. But I remember reading that and thinking, oh, this wasn't the way it was supposed to be. Yeah, I could tell.
Yeah, no.
So yeah, so it wasn't anything against Axis. It wasn't any kind of like, you know, like sort of like a Jar Jar Binks, we hate this character kind of thing. It was more like it complicates things. We just
like, why bother? Yeah. Like if especially if the audience is willing to give you the leeway. Like if the audience just cut to the chase, could you please?
Right. You know, I mean, as far as like fandom is concerned, there is this Earth X or Earth C, like C for crossover, where these stories take place, where the Superman, Spider-Mans take place, Batman versus Hulk. You know,
Titans X-Men.
X-Men. You know,
both of DeMatteis's Batman Spider-Mans also are on another Earth. They're just like, nah, that's
right.
We're not doing that.
Exactly, because the Hulk and Superman that met in the second Superman Spider-Man book. Yeah, they're not the same Hulk and Superman that are in this book.
That's true. You know? Yeah, no, well, because good. Yeah, because this Superman is married and has. Yeah,
and not only that, but you know, you could tell that in Superman Spider-Man book 2, that was the first time those 2 characters had met.
Definitely.
But my book shows the real. So it's sort of like, you know, it's stop thinking about continuity. It's going to drive you insane. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. You know,
that's exactly right.
That's the approach to these things, and that's the approach you have to take.
Oh man, I mean, we could jump into more crossovers if you know, till the cows come home. And it's funny because, like, I'm sure if anybody knows your work, they're kind of like, why aren't they talking about Onslaught or the Clone Saga or any other like tumultuous, important, or the bankruptcy period or any of these really, really like key moments in Marvel history that you were boots on the ground for?
Ask away if you.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I think we should dedicate some of those to a full on episode about you know, just the days of Marvel, like the dark days. But as far as you remember, you know, how were those times? Like from when you started to when you decided to move on?
The first few years were amazing. I mean, it was like, you know, an extension of my college years. It was like no other place in the world, no other company in the world. It was collegial. It was fun. It was it was the opposite of buttoned up. Yeah. You know, some editors would come in at like 6 o'clock at night and work till 6 o'clock in the morning, and then you wouldn't see them all day. for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they were just night owls, and other times a lot of their freelancers were in England. And so if you're going to be on the phone with your freelancers, you can't do it during normal business hours in America. You have to do it on their time.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. You know, there was no dress code. You know, there were people who, you know, wore bike shorts to work, and other people who wore, you know, deck shoes, and, you know, they looked like they were going off to a yacht, you know?
Yeah.
It was the name of the game was fun. And we had a great leadership team. I mean, Tom DeFalco was editor-in-chief at the time, and he was just very, you know, there was no doubt that he was in command. I mean, he was the boss, but he wasn't, you know, a micromanager. He was very easygoing, and his second in command was Mark Gruenwald, who was one of the, you know, he was the heart and soul of Marvel. And his whole thing was about this, you know, we are delivering fun to the world, so we need to be in a fun environment. And so that was one of the things that he really focused on. He was a mentor. He was a mentor to me. He was a mentor to a whole generation of assistant editors. He ran a weekly class that all the assistant editors, you know, would go to. He created a year-long curriculum that taught us the mechanics of story and serial storytelling, and how the character is at the center of the wheel, and the spokes of the supporting characters, and how they're supposed to accentuate the lead character and prop the lead character up, and what the supporting characters are supposed to represent to the lead character. So again, so he does this whole year-long curriculum that all the assistant editors attended these classes. And
are these in-house, like at Marvel Studio, like at Marvel, or is that like?
Oh yeah, yeah. Once a week, the assistant editors would get up, leave their offices, leave their bosses behind, and we would go into a conference room and have these, you know, classes that were led by Mark Gruenwald. And we'd have editorial staff meetings, mostly for the assistant editors, again, that were led by Mark, where he kept us up to date of what was going on. And he, you know, he was running the Bullpen Bulletins page, the legendary Bullpen Bulletins page. So he would like hit us up for ideas. When he passed away, I took over as the editor of the Bullpen Bulletins page. Really? Yeah, for a couple of years. But I mean, it was a real cast of characters. I mean, the closest I can, you know, think of is, you know, my days in college, where we kind of lived like Animal House, you know, and we were getting work done for sure. We were getting work done. Yeah. But the environment was so loose and so conducive to creativity, and it was, I mean, I was getting to work with all these people that I dreamt of working with when I was a kid. You know, projects would come up, and I'd say to my boss, I'd say, can we call this guy? Sure, give him a shot. Can we call it? I mean, so when I think of the names that I worked with, you know, short term for most of them, but I mean, after a while, I got to work with John Byrne, Frank Miller, George Perez, Roger Stern, Carl Kiesel, you know, some of the newer guys. Kurt Busiek, I established a real connection with Kurt Busiek.
Waringo.
Mike Waringo. But in terms of the people that I grew, Dick Giordano. Giordano retired from DC, which made him open to doing freelance for us. I snatched him right up. I got to work a little bit with Roy Thomas. I got to work a little bit with Jerry Conway, who was one of my favorite writers when I was growing up. Nice. So, you know, I mean, I could go on and on and on. I mean, it's probably quicker to name the people that I didn't get a chance to work with. The one white whale that I always wanted to work with and I never got was Neil Adams. Never got Neil Adams, but it was great. I mean, it was so much fun, and it was so, you know, and you know, it felt like a home. Yeah. And we all hung out with each other outside of work, you know, and some of my closest friends to this day are people that I met at Marvel. Oh, so now,
did you live in the same area? Were you in one of the boroughs?
I lived in Brooklyn.
Right on. Yeah.
At the time. So, but you know, I mean, the thing is, I loved my job so much that I didn't mind working after hours and staying late. I didn't mind coming in on the weekends because when all was said and done, I was doing what I love to do. You know, just a quick anecdote is, you know, I was the writer of this one shot called the Osborn Journal, which you had mentioned the Spider Clone saga.
Of course, yeah. That journal is a tome because it was so like it gave you so much insight into like after all of that, the mess, the web of that. To have a book that just says like here's what Norman was doing.
Yeah.
Here's how he influenced it specifically, as opposed to just being like the vagaries of today, where it's like, what did he do? Oh, he went to Europe,
right? And
managed things from there. Like how that Osborn Journal, I have that. I have at least 2 copies of that book.
Oh, bless you. But you know, I mean, I started. You know, you couldn't do freelance work on staff time. Mm-hmm. So I was writing the script, I believe, on October 31st, 1996. I was writing the script. And I started at, like, say, 5:30 at night after staff hours. And there were still people milling about outside my office, and the lights were on and all that. And I'm writing. And I get to the end, and I look up. All the lights are out. Everybody's gone. And I was like, what time is it? It was 11:30 at night, you know, and it's the latest I ever stayed at the office, but I didn't care, you know, because when all was said and done, this was my life's work. This was what I, you know, always wanted. So it was that kind of thing. Now that was for the first few years. Obviously, when the business took a downturn, it was rough. I mean, I lived through 2 downsizings before I finally left, one a year, and it was brutal seeing your friends, you know, get laid off. Yeah. It was brutal worrying about them. You do experience
yourself.
Well, you do experience a little bit of survivor's guilt.
Oh, definitely.
And I totally felt that way. And then finally, you know, and the positive effect of that was that as the staff got smaller, I got to interact with people that I hadn't interacted with before. And so at that point, since I had survived the first 2, I mean, I got to be noticed more by people who, you know, it's good to be noticed by. When the staff was big, I don't think Mark Grunwald was all that aware of me, you know. As the staff got smaller, he and I started to bond more because, you know, there's nobody else to hang out with. And so we realized, you know, we have a lot of the same interests. We were both major Beatles fans. We both had like a whole ton of like Beatles bootlegs that a lot of the world has never heard. We were both big fans of The Who. And he really did become a mentor to me, and almost, you know, like kind of like a godfather in some ways. And he did some things on my behalf that I hadn't asked him to do. And I found out afterwards that he did them. And I was like so moved and so flabbergasted. And that, you know, that was one of the only positive things about the bad times. And it was tough. It was tough going in every day wondering, is this the day where they shut us down? Is this the day where we go into liquidation? Is this the day where we all get fired? So it was like that for quite a while. And then finally we merged with Toy Biz. And immediately after we merged with Toy Biz, the rumors started that they were going to be cutting 20% of the workforce. And I was like, you know what?
This is after 2 layoffs.
This is after 2 layoffs before that. Yeah. So I was like, my number is going to be up. So, and it was, and so I that was late 98 that I left. So they were just about closing the deal to make the first X-Men movie, and the first Spider-Man movie was as I was on my way out the door. Wow. So,
oh my God.
Timing is everything. It's
true. Yeah, man, what a crazy time. And it's so interesting how that period that you worked in was such a formative and an interesting. It's tumultuous, absolutely, but also like it would only take about 30 years for people to finally like have reverence for it again. But but like nostalgia is a hell of a drug. But like it's but to compare them, you know, like that period right before, like when you worked there, and then right after you left and how radically different that must have been.
Yeah,
and the books that were coming out.
Yeah, I mean, I visited the office every now and then after I left, and it was a different vibe. First of all, they moved offices. That was one thing, and so that sort of lived in sort of like, you know, home feel that it had was very different. You know, the whole office layout, they moved more towards like an open office kind of thing where less privacy and and all that kind of stuff.
I saw it back in I want to say 2002, 2003. I BS'd my way into the office as a civilian. I just my friend lived in the city, and I went to go visit him, and I hate this thing. You know, my family's from New York City, so I'm very familiar with like Brooklyn and Manhattan and everything like that. But I live in Jersey, and when I would go to visit him in the Village, he'd be like, "What do you want to do?" And I'm like, "You live here, man. You tell me what you're doing. It's the big city. The city never sleeps. Just take me someplace." And he's like, I got nothing. And I'm like, "Well, let's go to Marvel." So we go over to Marvel. He's like, "How do you know where Marvel is?" I'm like, "Well, they have an internet. You know, we can look up their address. Go to their office, and you know, there it is. And go in. Doorman's like, sign in, and I'm like, okay, you're Fabian Nicieza. I'm Scott Lodell, and we just wrote those names instead. And they were like, "Oh, okay," because I'm like, the doorman have no idea. He has no idea who these people are. But if they look at the book, they'll think it's good. So we get in, we go up the elevator, we get to the next. There's like a glass waiting room that they have. Yeah. And so you get in there, and then there's another person waiting to sign you in. And so we're sitting in the main glass area, and this friendly young woman asks us for our names, and we give them, and she immediately gives us the side eye and goes, "And what are you here for?" And we were like, "Oh, we're here for the tour that Marvel offers every couple of weeks." And she's like, "Oh, okay." And then someone came in from the big room, so I got to look at like the office and see everything. And he comes out and he goes, "We don't give tours anymore." Right. And we were like, "Oh, I'm sorry. You know, I think I left something in the car," and we just immediately ran away before we got escorted out of the building.
Oh boy! Well, not only did we give tours, we used to give tours. The guy, the tours were given by a guy in a Spider-Man costume.
Oh my god! I did not know that. That's awesome.
So usually maybe every other Friday or maybe one Friday a month, you know, Spider-Man would come by with a group of tourists and show them around.
It kills me knowing, like, because I would go to New York like every Sunday to visit my grandma, and so like it was just all these things happening just right under my nose. And I love once we left, he was like, "What did we do now?" I'm like, "Well, let's go to DC."
Did you go to DC?
We did. We couldn't find the address, so I was like, "All right, well, I guess I'll just leave."
Wow, that is wild. Yeah. I mean, I'm going back to visit, especially when they moved to the new digs. You could see. I mean, you could see that the environment had changed. It had become a much more corporate environment, because you have to remember that there were new owners, you know, and this was even before Disney, you know. This was when they had merged with Toy Biz, and the guy who ran Toy Biz, his name is in the news all the time, Ike Perlmutter. Yes. And he was a real button down, you know, he was a real, you know. Yes. And so, there was no fun was going to be had under those.
Oh, hell no. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was very corporate. Yeah.
And so, you know, it took me a while to sort of get weaned off that kind of Marvel, you know, the Marvel environment that I was used to.
Oh, sure. You bring that to your next job. And
I brought it to my next job. And let's just say that didn't always go so well. But I'm okay now. I swear.
Good. Yeah. But, man. Well, I want to save some. I want to save some of this, because I think talking about, you know, the Heroes Reborn period and getting to like all these different places, there's so much there, and I want to save it because I think it'd be more interesting just to have to dedicate more time instead of trying to cram it all in.
Sure.
But I will say, this has been a blast. You should write a book. I would hope that there's like some, you know, write it all down. You know, I was there, boots on the ground at Marvel offices in 1996 to 8, or you know, it was. Yeah. By the way, did you ever write a coolometer when you were working on the Bulletin?
I helped. We all helped, and that was one of the things. That was one of the things that Mark Grunwald, when we would have the assistant editors meetings, he would ask us for. Throw out ideas for the coolometer, and it was always he would ask us for two things. He would do something called he would start the meeting. He would go, media shower, meaning what were the big things in media over the last week that So if there was a particular movie or a political point or some kind of like event that happened in the media, pitch it out to him, and he would think about either writing about it in the bulletin, put it on the coolometer, and then he would say coolometer ideas, and we would throw out ideas. So we all contributed. We all threw out ideas for that.
Nice. I love that. I remember very much that was as a young kid using the coolometer as a way to gauge my own interests and being very disappointed when I saw that Ninja Turtles was so much lower on the list.
Well, they weren't Marvel, so
yeah. Yet Quasar edged them out every single time.
I wonder why that was.
Yeah, can't think of it. But Glenn, thank you so much for being here, folks.
My pleasure.
You should be, if you aren't familiar, you will be now, and you're going to see his name all over the place. You're going to be like, oh my God, he worked on that too?
Well, if I could tell you what I've been working on lately.
And please do, yes, what's going on?
After Marvel, I went into journalism of a sort. I worked for Scholastic News, which was a news magazine for kids. Cool. And then I went over to Time Magazine for kids, and I made some connections there. And after leaving Time, I went into another line of work altogether. I went into marketing copywriting, but I still kept up on the journalism thing. And I've been doing these things called bookazines, which are when you go to like the supermarket or you go to Barnes & Noble, and you'll see like these magazine-sized publications, all devoted to one single subject. They've got like cardstock covers, and they're about 100 pages each. Yeah. I've been doing those for the former publisher of Time Magazine for kids. He packages these things. So I've done about 14 or 15 of these over the last few years. And most recently, I did one about Stan Lee in time for his 100th birthday.
Nice.
I did, this is one of my more recent ones.
Nice. I've seen that one.
I'm very proud of this one. I did a lot of interviews for this one, and I did the one that's the most recent one is this one. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, and so I love them. I love working on them. They're you can usually find them, like I said, in Barnes & Noble, sometimes pharmacies, grocery stores, any place where fine bookazines are sold. You can also order them. They're sold direct from the publisher at magazineshop.us, and you can so it's magazineshop.us, and you can type in Superman, Batman. I've written for this particular publisher. I've written 4 books about another subject very near and dear to my heart, the Beatles. So yeah. So if you're a Beatles fan, look me up. I've written a lot about the Beatles.
I love it. That's great, man. Yeah. Bookazines. That's amazing. I've definitely seen these things because we have a Books A Million at my mall. So I definitely.
Oh, cool! I love Books A Million. We don't have any in New York, but when I'm down in Florida visiting my in-laws, I always try to make it to the Books A Million. I never leave empty-handed.
No, it's true. Yeah, that's the plight of being interested in any literary media is like, well, I'm in a bookstore. I'm leaving with something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Glenn, thanks so much for being here. Folks, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time with another episode. Stick around for more.